and welcome to this panel discussion on Africa and the prominent continent. My name is Umberto Tavolato. I'm the Director of International Relations of Medor Leonardo Foundation. It's an Italian-European foundation established only 2.5 years ago by Leonardo, a major Italian defense and aerospace company, with the mandate to increase interactions, exchanges, understanding between Italy, Europe, the Middle East region, and Africa. And I want to thank, on behalf of our foundations, Dr. Ektisam Al-Keppi, for being, number one, a great supporter of our foundations, and number two, a keen person interested in Africa. I wanted to thank Dr. Ektisam Al-Keppi for being a great supporter of the Medor Foundations, and also taking a great interest on Africa and having Africa as a panel in this year's edition. I think I want to start with the title of this panel, as Africa as the prominent continent and promising continent. 65% of the African population today is below 30. By 2050, 30% of the world population is expected to be African. 30% of the mineral resources of the world are in Africa, and almost 40% of the expected renewable resources today are in Africa. There is in place an Africa free trade agreement, and as of today, only 3% of the global trade is in Africa. So the potentials are enormous and are there to be seen for everyone. But nevertheless, what we are also witnessing, from the Atlantic shores of Africa to those of the Red Sea, it's a wave of instability. From the Sahel to the Horn of Africa, several states have collapsed. Conflicts is there. And this is all complicated by international crisis and the crisis of multilateralism. The United Nations has been always traditionally had a huge role in Africa. Most of the peacekeepers of the United Nations are deployed in Africa, but today the UN is not playing the political leadership role of the past in the continent, and there is no consensus in the UN Security Council very often on how to move forward on African crisis. Also, the African Union has been weakened in recent years, and there seems to be a lack of momentum and enthusiasm across Pan-Africanism. So there is a lot of concern in the West, a lot of skepticism, but on the other hand, we are seeing also a lot of interest, especially from these regions, from the Gulf regions. And I would like just to mention two facts that shows, how this region sees strategically Africa and the future development in Africa. Last week on Friday, at the time of Gaza crisis, the Saudi have hosted an African summit with a huge presence of African heads of state, pledging 30 billion of investment in Africa in the next 10 years. In a couple of weeks, COP28 is happening here, and a major initiative of COP28 from the UAE is on Africa, with a commitment to invest $4.5 billion on renewable energy in Africa. So I think there is a clear sign of how serious this region sees the continent. So I'm very happy to have the honor to present a very comprehensive panels from every corner of Africa. On my left, I have His Excellency Dr. Abdalla Hamdok, who has been the Prime Minister of Sudan between 2019 to 2021, and is currently the Executive Chairperson of the Center for Africa Development and Investment. On his left, I have His Excellency Mohamed Benaissa, Mayor of Asila, Secretary General of Asila Forum Foundation, and former Foreign Minister of Morocco. Mrs. Chipokota Mwanawasa, Policy Advisor to the President of Zambia and Deputy Head of the Presidential Delivery Unit. Professor Hamdy Hassan, Professor of Political Science at the College of Humanities and Social Science at the Zayed University in the United Arab Emirates. And finally, Dr. Abdeta Beyene, Executive Director of the Center for Dialogue, Research and Cooperations from Ethiopia. So I would like to start with His Excellency Dr. Hamdok. Dr. Hamdok has also been, for 8 years, when I was a young diplomat in Addis Ababa, I remember him the Deputy Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. So he will also give us a broad Africa views, both geopolitically and geoeconomically, and how fragmentations at geopolitical level is affecting Africa and what is Africa's space. But first and for all, I think most interested of us is to hear from him about Sudan. In the last months with the Gaza crisis, Sudan, very few have heard about Sudan, but conflict and violence is ongoing. And we want to know from him, what's the situation at the moment and what's your view for the way forward?
This is not working still? No, it's working, yeah. No, thank you. Thank you, Umberto, and let me start by thanking the Emirates Policy Center under the able leadership of Dr. Ibtisam Al-Qutbi for inviting us to this very distinguished gathering and congratulate you on your 10th anniversary of this very distinguished Abu Dhabi strategic debate. And also the choice of the theme itself is extremely relevant and timely. Before getting to the theme of this session on the Africa, the promising continent, I don't think I can afford not to start with Sudan. Tomorrow would mark the end of the 8th month of this devastating war in my country. It is a catastrophic situation, loss of life in all respects. Tens of thousands of Sudanese men, women, children have perished in this senseless war. Millions were destitute, refugees, internally displaced. You can name it. Human suffering in all aspects. Shortage of food, shelter, medicine, water, electricity, and all that. And there is no end in sight of this war. Although there is a lot of effort that went into this, and I must thank regional and international friends and partners in coming to our rescue and trying to help. But yet, we're not getting there. I'd like to say also, there is no military solution to this conflict. We have to go through a political process that would be all-inclusive, bringing everybody together. I don't think what else as Sudanese would like to see as an eye-opener more than this devastating war. I think we would like to see a process that would allow us the opportunity to address the root causes of this conflict and maybe come up with what I would like to call a national project, and we can all, as Sudanese, converge in a national convention, probably similar to what happened in South Africa in between 1992 and 1994, which could provide the opportunity for us coming together with the help of our friends and partners in addressing the ills of the country. We're getting there. There is a lot of effort in this direction. 3 weeks ago, we had a very good meeting in Addis Ababa, bringing together many representatives of the political, civil space. And I think it's a step in the right direction. Not complete, but we are hoping to build on it and move forward with this process. I think I'll leave that Sudan question here, but let me briefly come to the issue we talked about, we were supposed to address in this session, Africa, the promising continent. I think it is indeed, Africa is a promising continent. I was sitting here listening to the last session, and the moderator was making this remark that the session was talking about China, India, the US for the entire session, and there was no mention of Europe. I got worried because from yesterday up to today, there was no mention of Africa as well. The marginalization of Africa continued. But I think there is one thing which we take home from this edition of the debate, from yesterday to today, that we are moving in a new world order. I'll talk about that in a minute. But the current world order came about after 1945, the end of the Second World War. It has its own institutions, mechanisms, and setups. I guess you observe this in institutions like World Bank, IMF, WTO, but also the UN Security Council with its veto and all that. That type of structure represents the prevailing world order and balance of power then. I think the world has moved on. Africa then was, I would like to call, a rule taker. The entire continent was under colonial rule. We were integrated in the global world order, global market, global system as a suppliers of raw material, as the tail end of the global value chain. Today, as we move into this emerging, I would like to think also, this world order is dying, is declining, is fading. A new world order is emerging. I don't think anybody here in the room or elsewhere could help us define with precision what it will take, what its character, its color, its shape, and all that. But there are manifestations. I think the establishment of the G20 is pointing to that. New thinking, new powers. BRICS Plus is also that sort of manifestation coming into. How would Africa then engage this new world order? Also, Africa is changing. Today, Africa is not the Africa that was 1945. Africa today has an African Union, a club of 54 members of the UN system, the largest regional bloc in the world today. Very coherent, with all its problems and challenges and all that. But Africa also, from the dawn of this century, started to define so many African common positions. Africa has a common position on climate change, common position on trade, on migration, but also Africa has a common position on the Palestinian question. President Mahmoud Abbas, without fail, was addressing the annual summit of the African Union, which reflect Africa's common position on the just question and the struggle of the Palestinian people. I think in this climate and in this new era, Africa would want one thing. Today, unlike 45, we would like to be at least a joint rule maker, being part of all the issues that define our destiny. Yes, we talk about Africa as a very rich continent. The moderator, my friend Umberto, mentioned Africa demography. Africa is a home for a young population, effective demand, labor force, but also it provides new dynamics in a world. On the other side, you have aging population with all its problems and challenges. This is definitely a plus. The mineral resources, the arable land, but more importantly, in the current debate on climate change, Africa can contribute a lot in the clean, green energy and all that, whether it is hydro. You've seen it. There are so many excellent examples. The Moroccan example of the solar, which has the biggest plant in the world, the hydropower, the Great Inga Dam, wind, and all that. So there are so many potentials. But I think we should be able to tap on all these resources with a new understanding. We cannot, and the world should not allow the situation whereby we continue to be the suppliers of raw material. We have to graduate in this global value chain and add value to our products. Value addition is not about increasing the value of the product, but also through industrialization, you create quality jobs. More than that, this will afford us an opportunity to give hope to our young talent, young Africans, instead of taking this extremely dangerous journey across the Mediterranean to go to Europe. If they are industrialization in the continent, quality jobs that pay high salaries and all that, they could be retained and they could see future in these places. And I think these are some of the issues that we need to talk with our friends, particularly our neighborhood in Europe, that this is something that we should talk about. Migration is an issue of development. If we create environment that would allow this talent to be retained here, they won't come and crowd your places there and stay in the margins of your societies. I think I'll leave it and stop here. Then maybe in the discussion we can elaborate further. Thank you.
Thank you very much, His Excellencies. Now I would like to give the floor to His Excellencies Mohamed Benaissa. Morocco is traditionally playing a very significant role in Africa, particularly in the Sahel and West Africa. We are seeing a lot of changing and constitutional changes in Africa, dynamics, geopolitical competitions, the role of Russia, the withdrawal of France. How do you think Africa should manage those changes?
Thank you very much. I would like first to extend my very sincere thanks to my friend, Dr. Dissam, for the hospitality and for also the perfect organization of this event. I give you from here my congratulations for having been able to keep this enterprise going for the last 10 years. Happy birthday. You know, whenever we talk about Africa, that's my general note and make, we talk about resources, we talk about problems, about crises, but we forget the men and women, the Africans. We don't talk about cultures, civilizations, distinctions that distinguishes one part of Africa from the other. In fact, there are Africas in that sense, if we don't have to use the political sense of one unified Africa. Today, Africa is suffering from a number of very serious issues. It begins with the cohabitation of neighbors. We see it, I don't have to cite samples, but we see it all over. Instability, which is a very big issue. There is what I call the new emancipation era. That is what's happening in the Sahel, for instance, as an example. All of a sudden, there is this eruption against doing things like talking with an accent. Either French, or English, or Portuguese, or Spanish, or Belgium, etc. Needless to emphasize that Africa has been cut like a piece of cloth on a table. With the exception of a couple of nations which had statehood characters, like Egypt, for instance, since time immemorial. Others, they were made up by those who were colonizing the continent. And they did it regardless of the affinities, cultural affinities, the values, the faiths, etc. But let me say in general that Africa today is a big, not only an issue, which we can, unfortunately, but it's also a destination. Not only economically. The Prime Minister mentioned all the potentials that Africa enjoys, but both, more, if we look today into programs in television stations, networks, CNN, BBC, France 24, the Russian theater. Every day, there are a series of programs about Africa. Fashion, music, design, architecture. This is new. Sport. And I'm talking about the last 5 years. Unfortunately, in our part of the world, I mean, since we are in an Arab state, we give very little interest to this trend because there is an investment. China was first, and unlike the colonial power which came earlier for other reasons, China came to help. I recall I was a young member, staff member at ECA, sir. Oh. Yeah, I came immediately after Mickey Abbas left. Okay. Robert Gardner was the executive secretary. Yeah. I spent 2 years. And then I worked for FAO as regional information advisor. I was stationed in Accra, in Ghana. And I had the chance to roam all the continent as a regional officer. And in that context, you see the potential, the real potential of the African continent. Not what we see superficially when the conflict erupts. That's unfortunately when we are mentioned. But I have one remark to make, which is basic. I do not know why we continue to split Africa by considering it only the so-called south of the Sahara or Black Africa, as if the North, which takes 1/3 of the soil of Africa, and the population is immense, about 300 million people, not mentioned. This was done purposely by the colonial power in the past. Unfortunately, we continued innocently to consider Africa. When we talk about Africa, we talk about Black Africa, the black man and woman. But there are also black men and women in the north. Many, in fact. My country, Morocco, is perhaps one of the most métis countries in the north. Africa, I think, should count on its own potential, and the basic potential is mankind. People, the Africans, I think this is really the resource. They often try to put in our mind that the most important thing in Africa are the resources, the natural resources. And they always, by that I think, the old masters, that's the source that we have today that guides the opinions, the attitudes in most African countries. What we hear, what we watch, what we read. The media, unfortunately, today is going through big crisis all over, particularly in our part of the world. So by and large, I think we should be optimistic. This passing problems, I call them, because Africa is in the making, and it's searching itself, its identity. It's not easy to impose these values out of blue sky. There is an admiration today of Africa in a romantic way, but very few people know the real issues in different parts of Africa. And the studies that were done, beginning with since the late 50s by the ECA and other organizations, plenty of studies, millions of studies. Today, others come to do other studies. It's the same. We know what's in. We know what we need to do. And I think the first thing we have to do, and I will stop, is to bring about an end of the skirmishes that we suffer from in Sudan, in the Sahel, all over Africa, in fact. Most of them are artificial, are wishes of individuals, ambitions, and they are not really real big issues that need to be taken seriously.
Thank you very much. The next speaker, Chipokota has been asked by the president to lead his delivery unit. So I think this is an interesting and definitely challenging task. But if we go more into practical issues, we've talked about geopolitical power trying to split Africa. You sit in a country, Zambia, in Southern Africa, a country and a region peaceful, so it can really seize the opportunity to focus on development, economic and investment. while delivering for the president, how do you manage the geopolitical competitions, and what are the effects on your country of that geopolitical competition today?
Thank you very much, Umberto. And just to join everyone else who's spoken before me, to congratulate Dr. Ebissam Kaib for their 10th anniversary and the Emirati Policy Center for putting together such a great event and a timely theme, old politics in a new age. And to just echo also what Prime Minister Hamdok said, that we truly are undergoing a new world order. Now, whilst we acknowledge this new world order, it's important to also acknowledge that Africa is actually key to this global change that is going on. And whilst we speak of all these other larger continents like Europe or larger countries like India, Africa is also going to take up its own space. So when we talk, for example, in the energy sector, we are not going to achieve net zero, without Africa. We've already heard from the moderator that over 60% of the critical minerals for net zero are in Africa. Just to give more data, over 85% of manganese is in Africa. And over 47% of cobalt is in Africa. And Zambia in particular, the country which I come from, is the 8th largest producer of copper in the world and the 2nd largest on the African continent. All these are minerals that go into the critical minerals that are needed for the electric vehicle value chain that the world is currently embarking on from an energy transition perspective. Now, when you say delivery and you combine that with geopolitics, so I'll start with the geopolitics or the geoeconomics, as we've heard both terms being used, is that Africa sits in a strategic position to actually leverage its huge mineral resources and energy resources to negotiate and get good deals and transactions of investments actually to come to the continent. And these investments should be mutually beneficial, both from the developed world and the African continent that is seeking to improve both from an economic and social perspective. Investment with the Gulf region, for instance, and the larger global community will have a significant benefit to African countries like Zambia, where I come from, in that it creates jobs and improves the economic prospects of that country. So I think from a geopolitical perspective, Africa is well positioned to leverage its resources that it has. Yeah.
Thank you, because I think the next speaker, we read a lot in think tank work, academia work, media, this issue of geopolitical rivalry dividing Africa and causing fragmentations. But from the previous speaker, also point of view, when you are a market and you have competitor from an investment point of view, usually it's an advantage, not a disadvantage. So how much here is Africa mismanaging the geopolitical competitions and missing opportunities? And how much such great power competitions has really an unstable effect?
Thank you very much, Umberto. And I'd like to thank my dear friend Dr. Ebissam, for having me here with the beautiful minds of Africa and, of course, of Europe also with us in this session. Let me start by a very quick note about how do we understand Africa. I'm teaching Africa for more than 35 years, and always the problem of misrepresentation and the narratives is a problem. How do we understand it? So the first one is there is a Eurocentric changing narrative about Africa. Sometimes they're giving it to you as a hopeless continent, as was painted in the Economics magazine in 2000. And then later on, in 2011, they said, oh, this is a rising continent. So this is followed by the 2010 McKinsey Institute, who said that Africa is a kind of lions on move, and they are going to surplus the Asian tigers. This kind of narrative, actually, it doesn't give us the real potentiality of Africa. We have to start with, if I followed the advice in the previous sessions, we have to define our terms. Our term is Africa as a continent. It is not the Hegelian divisions of Africa as European Africa or Nile Africa and the Black Africa. No, we are a Pan-Africanist, a Pan-Arabism, and I do recall the conference here in United Arab Emirates in 1974 in Sharjah Hall, where the African thinkers and the Arab thinkers met together in a strategic dialogue, where my late Professor Ali Mazroui coined his, I think, fascinating recipient for the unity of Africa and the Arab world. He called it Afrabia. This is a beginning of it. Now, if I turn to this kind of competition, let us say they call it new scramble for Africa, because always we started from the colonialism, the gunboat diplomacy, where they colonized Africa with mercantile kind of approach, how Africa, as Walter Rodney, underdeveloped, how Europe underdeveloped Africa, or put it the other way, how Africa, like what Ali Mazroui said, contributed in the development of Europe. So it was always how to get African resources and how to marginalize Africa in the international system. Africa was not there, even in Berlin Conference 1884, 1885. It was divided among the Europeans. And then later on, during the bipolarity of the Cold War, it's another scramble for Africa under the containment policy of Truman, the Truman Principle. Now what we are seeing in the post-Cold War is the rule of the games are changing. And let me tell you, any challenge creates an opportunity. So now I think the rule of the game that we are witnessing in Africa, a kind of rivalry. Is it a new Cold War with the old rules of the game like the previous Cold War? I say no. Because Africa, with the new generation and the bargaining power, they can maximize their interest. You see now the Chinese taking a step in the Belt and Road Initiative. And this is what we call it a stadium diplomacy, because they are investing more in infrastructure. They're building roads, they're building railways. So this is very beneficial for the African. And I think for the Americans, they are still there. And you can see with parallel to the Belt and the Road Initiative, you have Lobito in Angola, where Zambia, DRC, and Angola are part of this, where the American trying to invest in this corridor to take the mineral to the west, and instead going to the east in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. So you see that there is a potentiality for Africa to have a parallel relationship and partnership with the rivalry or with this rising power and old power. Sometimes you have a kind of exaggeration about the Russians or about the Chinese. You know, you are trying to increase the investment, the foreign investment in Africa, where Africa is badly in need. You look, one of the greatest challenge is energy security in Africa, where you have abundance of gas, natural gas in Africa, right? When the European phasing out the Russian gas, their own eye is on Africa. However, you have many Africans, they cannot afford to have access to power. So now you can invest in that. The issue of underfunding energy in Africa. The world investment in energy is like $434 billion. The only share of Africa in this amount is 0.6%. This is underfunded. So that is the kind of, if you maximize your bargaining power in this kind of a new rivalry or a new scramble for Africa, it will be good. Let me just give you two new principles that they will guide the African in reshaping this geopolitical shift after the Ukraine war. Number one is a real politic. A real politic. The revival of non-alignment. You see, if you look at the voting mode in the United Nations, the two resolutions concerning the Ukraine war. So it was divided by the African. 50% of the African stand in favor of the resolutions. And the other 50%, either they abstained or they were absent. And with the two only countries who were standing with Russia is Mali and Eritrea. This kind of looking where you stand, how do you maximize your benefit? Now there is a call, yes, we can have this kind of partnership, a shift. When I go to the BRICS, it doesn't mean that I'm going to stand with China. When I go voicing our concern in the G20 that we are not a pro-Western. We are trying to maximize our interest according to the realpolitik approach. The second one, it has to do with security, indivisible security, because no more you are going to look at security as individual matter for Africa. Because if you look at the Sahel or the Horn of Africa, this is a security complex. So the security of any country, it affects the other countries in the region. Let us take the last example, I'm going to stop here, yes. Is the new defense accord, the Liptako-Gorma, between the new military regime in the most unstable area on the earth. It's between the triangle, borderline between Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso. They started this. So if the Russian existence and the Wagner existence affecting the regional security, so it is a matter of concern for the African Union. I'm going to stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Abdeta, I think to take advantage of the speaker's experience, some of you have doing politics in your country, others have served at a very high level diplomacy. Dr. Abdeta was the chief of staff of the Foreign Ministry of Ethiopia for many years. I think it's good if we try to contextualize and make the issue as current as possible. So regarding Ethiopia, traditionally the center and the power of the Horn of Africa, a region in the neighborhood of the Gulf. We have seen a couple of months ago the president of the UAE, Mohamed bin Zayed, visiting Addis Ababa. Prime Minister Abiy was recently in Riyadh. There is a lot of momentum, 17 MOUs signed between the UAE and Ethiopia. Can you explain the strategic relevance of this region for Ethiopia and for the Horn?
Thank you. Thank you, Umberto. I would like to join others in thanking Dr. Ibtisam for inviting me to speak here, and for the 10 years anniversary of the Emirati Policy Center. Before addressing probably questions that you raised, it might be good from the perspective of the Horn and the Gulf to raise a couple of issues. One, the Horn is in transition. Ethiopia is in transition since 2018. Power has moved to the south. Some are saying Ethiopia's transition is not well managed, but considering what Sudan finds itself, Ethiopia is still managing the transition. Of course, Sudan is in transition. The transition has not been managed. Probably the international community will say, well, we should have supported the civilian government that Dr. Hamdok led. Probably they could have stopped the disasters that Sudan finds itself. Of course, Somalia is also in transition. There is a bit of progress in terms of fighting Al-Shabaab. There is expectation, a drawdown of ATMIS, which will have serious implications. The Gulf is also highly involved in directly supporting Somalis in strengthening their transition. Of course, in the Horn, at the same time, one can say that multilateralism has been weakened a little bit. The countries of the region have to think differently to bring up a better multilateralism arrangement in the Horn of Africa. Of course, the Horn of Africa has also problems related to center-periphery relations. Some explain the changes in Ethiopia in terms of center-periphery relations. Some explain what's happening in Sudan as a challenge between the center and periphery. Of course, the Horn is endowed with huge resources. Water, as you might know, Ethiopia contributes 86% of the Nile waters that reach Aswan Dam. So whether we like it or not, Ethiopia is part of the security calculus of Egypt. There is a huge potential for hydrocarbon, hydroelectricity, and other renewable energy that can bring cooperation between the Horn and the Gulf. Of course, the Gulf, on the other hand, has made a huge stride in involving the Horn in the institutions of the Gulf countries. The Red Sea Council is one. The Gulf also has put forward strategic interests in the Horn as part of the food security, as part of future development endeavors, because it has a huge population in that part of Africa. Of course, there are some who are saying the Gulf and the Horn are in the same security complex, and hence the Gulf has a legitimate right to look at the Horn of Africa from a security perspective as well, since they are in the same security complex. But at the same time, there is a lot of complementarity between the Horn and the Gulf. The Horn has huge resources: water, agricultural land, minerals, hydroelectricity potentials. And the Gulf has wells. It has a lot of capacity in terms of financing activities, of course, which is seen suspiciously by bigger powers globally, because the Gulf has the capacity to displace those who have influenced the Horn and its development. Ethiopia, as a country who has for the first time built a dam on the GERD, has the potential to produce huge electricity. The GERD alone can produce more than 5,000 megawatts of electricity. This is a potential for industrialization, transforming agriculture, which the Gulf also can hugely benefit out of it. But in the fundamental challenge that we have on the GERD is the GERD will have serious consequences on how Sudan develops in the future, because there is a sustainable water flow, and hence Sudan will have a new capacity to use more land, more water in agricultural transformation, which will be seen as a challenge for other riparian countries. But going back to the Gulf-Ethiopia relationship, yes, Ethiopia is in transition. There is a close working relationship between the leadership of the United Arab Emirates and Addis Ababa. It has serious implications on sustaining peace and stability in Ethiopia. There is partnership both in the region and beyond between the Horn and the Gulf. As I said, as they are, the Gulf and the Horn are in the same security complex. There is a legitimate interest between the two to cooperate further, but as I indicated, there are also suspicions into those relationships which others are continuously expressing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to encourage the audience to raise questions. Before going to questions, I want to, we have not talked yet about the upcoming COP28 in Dubai and the relevance for Africa. I want to ask to Chipokota, as an African government and country, you know, how you are preparing for this event and what do you see as opportunities in there?
Thank you very much, Umberto. Maybe just before I come to that, you had mentioned earlier that Zambia is reasonably peaceful, and I think we've heard from the other panelists what's happening in different parts of the region. I think whilst, yes, we take that badge that Zambia is surrounded by 8 neighboring countries, but, you know, touch wood, never been to war. It's key to recognize the fact that, and this is something my boss, the president of Zambia, says a lot, that instability anywhere means instability everywhere. So we are actually impacted by what's happening. Nonetheless, we remain very optimistic about the African continent, and I think we should all be optimistic about the opportunities that lie there, including the approach that we are taking to participate at COP28 here in the UAE. So the approach is actually that we are looking forward to actualizing partnerships, creating more partnerships, and getting tangible climate financing. It's already been highlighted that Africa as a continent is endowed with oil, natural gas. So there was a mention of natural gas. Actually, just over 8% of the global deposits of natural gas in the African continent, and we obviously have the hydro potential. But when we talk about all these renewable resources, there's still a big gap, and I think this is what we will be coming with to COP28, to leverage that resource endowment that we have and get investment channeled to Zambia for energy infrastructure. So whether it's the grid resilience and reliance to actually transport the electricity domestically in the country, within the region and across the continent, but also energy storage. So a lot of these renewable energy resources like wind and solar also need significant investment in storage capacity. So we are looking forward to that interaction from a COP perspective. And whilst I speak for Zambia, I think these are similar approaches that Africa and other African countries will be taking as well.
Thank you very much. We have questions from the audience. Asad Al-Shamlan.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you very much for all the speakers. For reasons of time, I'll just confine myself to two quick questions. Let me recall first that there was last week a first summit between Saudi Arabia and the African countries, and that is, as far as I know, is a first. Itself is an event. Unfortunately, it was dwarfed, understandably, by what happened in Gaza. and there will be another Arab summit. So things are moving rather substantially between Africa and this part of the world. But my question is, I noticed that some of our African brothers understand this, they approach this, perceive this, and insert it into some kind of anti-colonial, anti-Western stand. And I have lots of respect for people like the late Ali Mazrou'i and all the anti-colonial discourse. I have no problem with that personally. But on a political level, I would like to say that neither Saudi Arabia or the other Gulf states consider the West or Europe as a strategic adversary. There are differences, etc., but they are never seen before, now, or I don't anticipate in the future that we see the West as such as a strategic adversary. My second point, and quickly, I really, if someone, maybe His Excellency Hamdok, with his considerable experience, or others, they are all with great experience, just to know how do the people in sub-Saharan Africa look at the Arab East, the Gulf, and Saudi Arabia. I mean, my sense is that, let's say from the Gulf point of view, Saudi Arabia point of view, Africa, apart from the brotherly relations, etc., it's an arena of promising investment. And I think it's approached in that way, not exclusively, but that's fundamental to it, on the assumption that there will be a good return for investment. The era of cash help, etc., is over. Now things are calculated rather religiously. And I wonder, and for that to happen, of course, there are two impediments, which are corruption and management waste. Now, how do Africa look at that? And thank you very much.
Thank you. We have another question from Marwan El-Krekshi. Sorry for the pronunciation.
Yes, Marwan El-Krekshi from CMI Finland. My question is to Mr. Benaissa. So as you know, I mean, there are many regional cooperation frameworks in the continent, ECOWAS, SADC, and so on, that are relatively well functioning. How can we fix the Maghreb? I'm asking this to you because I know Morocco is a constructive player. How can we, despite all the political differences that exist, how can we, at least on the economic side, get some cooperation going and get out of this kind of frozen situation we have in the Maghreb region? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, I want to divide the questions. Excellencies Hamdok, the era of cash is over. What these regions look for in Africa is investment. And that requires also creating conducive environment in Africa for investments, anti-corruption, governance, and whatsoever. Do you want to, give your view on that? And also, if you can possibly mention some of what you think are major strategic projects in Africa today, where you would, encourage investors to rally behind.
No, thank you very much. I think this is an extremely important issue. Definitely, the era where the Arab world is giving handouts and grants and all that is over, and we are happy to see that over, because we do not also want to see Africa to be treated as a basket case, a charity destination. Africa is a place which is very rich with so much potential we would like to see the capital from this part of the world to see Africa as an investment destination. Return to investment in Africa is probably one of the highest in the world, if not the highest. There are huge opportunities in Africa. Let us look at even the challenges of the continent today. The poor infrastructure, both hard and soft, ports, rail, roads, and all that. These are opportunities. Let us transform these challenges into opportunities. Let me give you an example. When this world was closed, locked up during COVID, I think this region, you are addressing your food security from very far places. We don't want you to stop that, but look at the closed continent here. It's coming from your food coming from Argentina, from Brazil, Australia, New Zealand. There is a continent at a throw of stone here, from here. You can produce anything you would like. Crops, livestock products, and all that. So let us look at this relationship as strategic relationship that would provide opportunities to create a win-win situation. The huge surplus of resources here, let it come to the continent and let us work together on that. And I think this should be the future that we should look at moving forward on this. Yes, there are issues of perception, issues of corruption and all that, but corruption is all over the world. We can work on it. Africa also needs to address some of the investment climate, investment opportunities, investment laws, rules, issues of property rights and all that. But I think there are so many places where Africa is definitely working on that. If you look at the success stories today, 5 of the fastest growing economies in the world today are in Africa. Cote d'Ivoire, Rwanda, and many others, Kenya and others. The good story, when my friend Professor Hamdy talked about the McKinsey report, which came about 10 years ago, talks about the elephants in the move and all that, then the story was a natural resource-driven growth. Today we are looking at a very different qualitative growth. Opportunities in telecommunication, in fintech, in so many new technologies that is driving this new growth. So there are huge opportunities here, and there is a lot Africa can benefit from the experience here in this part of the world, the neighborhood, and there is a lot in terms of complementarities and joint culture. Half of Africa is Muslims. They come to this world with a rich heritage and all that. I think I just wanted to mention the first question about the strategic adversary relationship between Africa and Europe. I think even that, it was history. If you look today, the most strategic partner for Africa is the European Union. In fact, the African Union itself is modeled after the European Union. There is a new dawn in this relationship. Yes, we have very troubled past history, colonial rule and all that, but colonial rule left Africa 60 or 70 years ago. Cannot continue to blame that. We have to open a page, start a new relationship that is again built on mutual respect and on mutual benefits. I mentioned earlier in my first intervention the issue of migration. This is a perfect example for fixing the relationship between Africa and Europe. Instead of Europe looking at migration from Africa through policing and building walls and all that, let us look at this as a development issue and work with the continent to help build a better future for this young talent who is leaving. When Africa loses these young people who go roam the streets of Europe, stay in the periphery, we're not only losing the current, we're also losing our future. These are very highly educated people, educated through taxpayers' money from the rich part of the world, from the poor part of the world rather, and going there. Let us work in helping these people, young talent, to see hope in the continent. I think my generation and the people before us, those who went to Europe and America in the 60s and the 70s for education, they did not stay a day. You finish the following day, you pack your bags and go, because there were opportunities where you come from. These opportunities are lost, but I think it's a joint issue. There are also, I don't want to portray a rosy picture about the migration, there are push factors. Issues of bad governance, civil wars, conflicts and all that fuel this. But even this one, the fuel, climate and all that, these are at the end of the day development issues. If we address them together, that would create a better world that would be useful for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, I also want to make contributions on this issue of investment, because when I saw the announcement of IMEC, the India and Middle East Europe Economic Corridor, I think what we are seeing on the making, and it's already there, but nobody has announced it, nobody has conceptualized it. We are in front of a coming India, Middle East, Africa corridors. And that is the triangulations of trade, ports, infrastructures, hydropower, renewable energy. Nobody has really, put it in these terms. And sometimes, trade happens without announcement and logo, and actually most of the time probably is the best and most efficient way to happen. But I want to say this is a corridor that is existing, and as we talk about data and economic growth, this is one that it is going to be a key factor and a key corridor for the Global South. So I would like to, before going to the question on the Maghreb, to finish the conversation on investments, whether you also have some example of big strategic projects, investment projects, economic corridor, energy corridors that you think are critical for the regions. And I also would like to go to Dr. Abdeta. Ethiopia, always in the news for the GERD, the Nile Dam, and now recently, the Prime Minister of Ethiopia voiced need of Ethiopia to have better access to Red Sea ports. How do you see these big investments being transformative for the continent?
Well, very briefly, I dare say that what is going on now in terms of cooperation in all fields, particularly in the economic field, it's what's happening in Northwest Africa, from Morocco downwards. This is very well known. The King Mohamed VI has established cooperation and Africanization of the approach in terms of economics and all fields, Africa. He has been going physically to every place in Africa. And it's working, frankly. Now, there is this big, huge project of the pipeline coming from Lagos and from Nigeria all the way to Morocco, crossing 10 countries in West Africa and the Sahel. This is a huge project. And it will benefit all the countries and also will bring about some change in the international business relations, especially for Europe. Other resources are now, especially the banking resources, airlines, communication. Those are fields of investments that are working very, very well, at least in our part of the world, if I may take this opportunity to answer the gentleman who asked me about the Maghreb very quickly, I would say, I think, I don't know him personally, but I think in his question, he had the answer. Because he sounded like someone who knows why, but he wanted me to say it. I think out of respect for the United Arab Unit, which hosts us, there is no need to go into details about this issue. Everybody knows. Everybody knows that we have a situation which is not only bad, but unheard of in today's times in the world. You know, all relations are broken between Algeria and Morocco. No air, no sea. It's like Gaza. No train, no road, nothing. No diplomatic relations, total. And of course, Morocco and Algeria are major actors in the Maghreb by size of the population and size also of the countries. But let me just say for the audience, for those who perhaps do not know, the baby, the idea, the very seeds of Africanization of Africa was born in Casablanca in 1960, when Nkrumah, Modibukita, Sukuturi, Bourguiba, Gamal Abdel Nasser, they all convened in Casablanca as guests of King Mohamed V. And that group went to Addis Ababa and established the African Union, the OEU. So Morocco was a very major player then and now. You know, it's very embarrassing for me to talk about my country, to be honest, you know, to boast. But it's very well known. We have problems, but we have a problem of which Africa is now suffering, Balkanization in Ethiopia. Everywhere there is some either created by geopolitical situation or it exists, doesn't matter. But the Maghreb is the only, perhaps, it's the most natural union that could exist in our part of the world. It has all the elements, the basic, fundamental conditions to be together. It doesn't work, unfortunately.
Thank you. 1 minute.
Okay, I have 2 quick...
1 minute, because the time is running, and I want to do a conclusive session. Yes.
I have 2 quick concluding remarks. The first one about how to invest or how to boost the Arab-African relation. I think there is a very sensitive issue about the history and the war of perception, the mutual perception between the 2 parties. 2 main factors here. I can refer to the Afrocentrism, which mainly came from the diaspora and the Harlem cultural tradition in New York, where they focused on that the Arabs are invaders, that Islam is alien to Africa. This is what Ali Mazrui coined as let us say, black Orientalism. And the second factor, actually, it started in South Africa about decoloniality when the student destroyed the statues of Cicerones. So the 2 important factors are very important to understand in order to raise the awareness again and to build the bridges between the two parties. The second issue is that we have, this is very important.
20 seconds to finish as well.
Just for the investment, what we offer here in the Gulf, it is not offered by the Chinese or the American or the Western powers. So this is why we have a win-win approach. We started our model of development the same, building on fuel and oil and natural gas, but we succeeded. We have something to offer for Africa. This is what I mean. But before we do that, we need to understand each other. We need to raise the awareness how important that we're forging what I called it in one of my recent book on the UAE soft power in Africa, the third way. So there is a third way beyond Washington consensus and Beijing consensus.
Thank you very much. Abdeta?
1 minute, yeah.
1 minute.
It's good that the Gulf thinks that there is no strategic adversary with Europe or with other former colonial powers. It is good that the Gulf thinks that way. The question is, how would others look at you? That is the most important part. And because of the way they look at you and the possibility that the Gulf can displace those who have continued to influence policy in the Horn, the Gulf has to think that perspective as well. In terms of promising investment, I think, as I said earlier, there is complementarity, there is resource, there is water, there is land, industrialization, agricultural expansion is possible. There is a possibility for a strategic partnership between the Gulf and the Horn, and that can help both. The concern some elsewhere are raising is they think that the Gulf will control both sides of the Red Sea. And hence, the 40% or so international economic trade in the Red Sea would be influenced by the Gulf. This is their concern. But it is also to make sure that whatever the Gulf does in the Horn doesn't displace them. I think the UAE has strategically made a choice to develop corridors of development in the Horn. I think that is a very good approach to move on, in my view. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I would like to conclude the sessions and thanks all the speakers. I hope that we have reflected the importance of Africa in the new world. Thank you.